Hey guys, it's been a minute. Sorry for the wait, but I'm really happy to say that it is finally time. Finally, I get to make a video about the post-nuclear, British, retro-futurist alt history game everyone's been asking me to make for a good long time now. Wait, Atomfall is a really interesting game to cover for this channel for two main reasons. First and most obvious, this channel's most popular content is geared around a franchise that at face value seems very similar to what Atomfall has going on. If you've only seen trailers and screenshots, or even if this video is your first exposure to the game at all, you might be led to believe that this is more or less just a British Fallout game. But the second and most interesting reason is that it's not. We'll cover British Fallout soon, but what Atomfall is decidedly different from the two big franchises you could compare it to. And for a channel like mine, one so concerned with the game design, story, and worlds of other post-nuclear games, Atomfall's more survival-forward and non-linear game design are worth investigating. Often, especially with mods, the stuff I cover on this channel feels really afraid of taking a new direction. Loads of the stuff coming from fans of Fallout, naturally, will seek to emulate Fallout as much as possible, and one of my biggest recurring complaints is that they do this too blindly. Rather than actually deciding whether or not what another game did was correct for the experience they've built, they do it because the other games did it. Atomfall's an interesting game for our purposes because it's a window into an experience that chooses to be different. The game can show its influences in some ways, but more often than not, this is an excellent case study into how a formula we all intuitively understand can be produced in a new, fresh way. I've kept an eye on this game since the first few trailers dropped, and I had planned to see if it was something I wanted to make a video on after release. However, as a first for this channel, I'm happy to say that this video is actually sponsored by Atomfall. Atomfall is a new, single-player, first-person action survival game developed by Rebellion, the folks that put together Sniper Elite and Zombie Army. The game came out on the 27th of March 2025, and you can try it out on all platforms. I had a blast with this game. And I think what it does differently, particularly as it relates to its story structure and quest design, is superb, and diving into all of it is exactly what this channel's all about. You can play Atomfall on Game Pass, Xbox Series S and X, as well as Xbox One, PS5, PS4, and PC via Steam or the Epic Games Store now, using my links in the description or the pinned comment below. Because this game is brand new, I'm going to try to keep spoilers to a minimum this time, especially since with this game in particular, I would absolutely recommend going in blind as far as story's concerned. Let's get into it. The way the game introduces itself does really well at portraying its priorities. You wake up in a bunker with a stranger, and not 30 seconds later you're engaging with the survival crafting loop, and another 5-minute tutorial later you're out in the world to explore. The overall story structure of Atomfall kind of reminds me of Fallout Dust. You are an amnesiac, stuck fighting tooth and nail for survival. The main quest has a lot more to do with exploring and uncovering what's happened through notes and voice logs than it does with strict linear quest progression. The overall goal of the main quest is the same as Fallout Dust as well, to escape. The first thing you'll learn about the world of Atomfall that you wouldn't assume just from this video so far is that this isn't the fate of the world. If you recall, the word I've been using is post-nuclear, not post-apocalypse. An accident at a power plant, an entire area of Britain inaccessible by air, made mostly lawless and definitely violent by its isolation from a world that, for all you know, is doing just fine. And that's not even really to say that the quarantine zone is doing that bad either. I mean, aside from the food rations and roving maniac gangs, this world is just absolutely beautiful. The obvious thing here is the color palette. Atomfall is more saturated and green than any of its siblings in the post-nuclear space. The game is also really good at distant visual landmarking. The map is divided into 4-ish major zones that are all relatively small in and of themselves. It won't take you longer than a couple minutes to walk from one corner of a zone to the other, which means the world is really dense in a way I enjoy. And it's dense with areas you can see from a distance and choose to explore if you so desire. The maps being a little smaller also help mitigate the effect of whatever backtracking you may need to do, as the game doesn't have any fast travel. Getting good at the navigation becomes part of the game in and of itself, as finding paths where you can avoid the most combat possible, or if you do get into combat, paths where you're at an advantage, was a lot of fun. Atomfall describes its own combat as desperate, which I think is a great word for it. In an upcoming video, I go into how, in a lot of games, the most fun parts of their combat are in the early hours in times of scarcity. A lack of consistent resources means you have to think more about the tools you have and how you can maximize their value in the environments you find yourself in. So many games do this really well right at the start. You begin the game with very little in the way of resources, and as a consequence of this, fights feel like they have a cost. Maybe you shoot too many bullets, maybe you use all of your healing items, maybe that one single grenade you found to get you out of a tough situation had to be spent. Almost always, however, as the hours go on, the player hits a number of power spikes that make them begin to outpace the easy enemies, and then outpace the medium enemies, and then they're face tanking 10 Deathclaws at once. Atomfall's subversion of this is refreshing. The game is well designed around its scarcity. Even at the end of my playthrough, resources were scarce. I ended the game with less than 20 bullets between all of the major weapon types. Atomfall does not give you a power fantasy by its endpoint just for the sake of cheap dopamine. The reward you get from Atomfall's gameplay comes from understanding its enemy types, understanding the options you have available to you to deal with each enemy type effectively, and leveraging those towards your success. Melee enemies can be reliably dealt with using melee weapons. You will win if you have a brain and can pattern your strikes effectively. For ranged battles, headshots must be hit, obviously, so when dealing with crowds of enemies at once, you're probably better off using a shotgun or grenades. Being hit by a bow and arrow staggers you, so while it may be tempting to use melee weapons, you might not even be able to get close fast enough. Ferals move fast and hit hard. Thralls move slowly and knock you back so that they can corner you. These robots sure are cool, wonder what their deal is. You never get enough power as a player, either through your items or through your perks, to not have to think about these things. I have found this to be exceedingly rare in games I've played recently. The combat never gets boring. It's hard, it's rewarding, and the guns feel good to use. Even if somehow you do get overpowered in one way or another, the game's difficulty is fully modular. You can tweak nearly everything until you get a satisfying experience rather than just upping the difficulty and making everyone have more health. If you're finding too much ammo, you can drop loot rarity. If you're finding yourself getting away with running around out in the open, you can adjust so enemy AI is better, their bullets will hit more often and hit harder. Difficulty options even have variables for exploration. Quest markers are fully optional, the compass too. The game does a really fantastic job at its default difficulty of making combat desperate as advertised, and it gives the player an abundance of tools to change the game such that that target is consistently met throughout a playthrough. While there are a variety of enemy types, enemies within those types are pretty samey. There aren't a wide enough array of enemy models. You'll enter an enemy base and suddenly you're being chased by 7 people, 4 of which are identical. Does this mess with the gameplay? Not really, but if the game is going for gritty, cutthroat combat immersion, this does have a dampening effect. Outside of the combat gameplay, the other two important parts of this puzzle are crafting and the limited character progression mechanics that exist through perks. On the side of crafting first, there isn't much to say. A lot of Atomfall's strengths lie in its more experimental aspects, and unfortunately the crafting here is pretty basic and bare bones. The one thing I really have to say about this is that I love how going into the menu to craft doesn't pause the game. What this means is that you can't just call a timeout to whip up some bandages or a Molotov, because if you try, you'll just continue to get hit while you do the crafting animation. The crafting system feels a lot more like it was built for preparation than for reaction. You have to think about what you'll need in a given area and usually craft it beforehand instead of go gadgeting items out of thin air in the middle of short-range fights. In terms of progression, the game has a variety of perks, and I will give them this much. Some of these perks give the player new abilities, like disarming traps. I also like how limited you are in your access to them. Atomfall is a pretty short game, and I say that as a compliment because it leaves less time for the player to become overpowered. You'll only get a handful of these perks in one run, which makes choosing them feel much more important. However, a lot of them are honestly really boring. Less recoil, more damage from throwables, The saving grace of the perk system is that it feeds into and reinforces Atomfall's greatest strength, its exploration and quest progression loop. One of those difficulty options among Atomfall's extensive list I spoke about earlier is an option that hides if the quest you're doing advances the main quest or if it's a side objective. Hiding this is something I actually really recommend because what I found with it on is that a staggering number of the quests you're presented with advance the main quest in some way. Often, this is in ways that aren't immediately obvious to you. Telling the player that they're doing a main quest without telling them how is interesting. Doing what you think is a side quest that turns out to provide valuable information or items you can use for the main quest later is more interesting. Atomfall's greatest trick is its interconnectedness. Take this as an example. In the town of Wyndham, there is a church. At a certain point, you can walk into the church and find a dead woman. The bystanders swear it wasn't them, and that she was instead killed by someone who must have ran off. The woman has a note on her, and you start the quest to track down who killed her. Classic, self-contained murder mystery story about the town, right? In another game, this would be a textbook side quest. Not only does this quest involve two of the game's major factors, factions, it advances a path towards one of the game's endings and provides you with a critical resource for story progression depending on who you side with. This was, for my money, the best quest in the game, just based on the sheer number of variables, the hidden main quest progression, and the way it primes the player to stay cautious about who they trust. And that sentiment brings us to the game's main story. There are multiple paths that can take different players towards survival, and it all starts with the voice in the telephone boxes.
Must die.
This voice, whoever it is everywhere, in every telephone box, and seems to know what you're doing at all times. Will you trust it and follow its advice, or will you go your own way and find some other path outside of the zone? Through your exploration and quest progression, you'll meet a whole host of different factions and characters, and finding your way out of the quarantine zone depends on the paths you've unlocked by meeting people and getting some trust out of them, and who you yourself choose to trust in the end of it all. I'll be blunt here. I don't love the dialogue in this game. There is very little about any of the characters in the story that is subversive, surprising, or unique. The dialogue options you get as a player can have an impact on how characters perceive you, but the game doesn't trust you to understand the potential consequences of your speech, instead choosing to label them all with tone indicators. This, however, is not to say that I dislike the game's story. The best moments of dialogue in this game come through notes and audio logs found in the world. The non-linear story structure is really good, and the quest writing and design in terms of choice and consequences is strong. You can kill every single NPC in the game if you want to. Loads of quests have different outcomes based on what you do and in what order. Even if the dialogue itself is kind of hit or miss, there's a lot to be commended here. The final bit of story I can go into without spoiling anything is that a large portion of the main quest has to do with restarting the power in a massive, sprawling underground facility called the Interchange. This area rocks, and exploring it was engaging, largely due to how strong the audio logs, notes, and environmental storytelling in this game is.
What are you doing? Trying to help you, Dr. Fisher. Now stay still. No! No! Get that away from me, Alan! It's not... It's not...
Without diving into spoilers, the way the plot resolves itself leaves a little to be desired. The mystery's reveal at the end is satisfying, but not as fleshed out as it potentially could have been. Atomfall is very much a journey over destination kind of game. Even if the conclusion to this mystery is lackluster, the experience of slowly peeling the layers back, learning bits and pieces about the world, its groups, and its history makes up for it in a lot of ways. I had a lot of fun with this game. It didn't wow me in all of its areas, but it felt almost like the game understood that and leaned into what I believe are its greatest strengths, the exploration and non-linear storytelling. It was challenging and fun mechanically in all the right ways, and its fun wasn't sapped by player power creep like in most games. Like I said at the top, I had my eyes on this game for a pretty long time, and I expected it to be a lot of things that it didn't end up being. What it was instead was a breath of fresh air in a time when post-nuclear settings and open worlds are almost getting kind of stale. Short experimental games like this are what we need more of in the industry right now, so honestly I was really happy with what I played here. I'd like to thank all of you for putting up with my extended absence, and I want to let you know that I've got more coming right around the corner. This one's been a super fun experiment for me, and I hope you guys enjoyed this brief little look into a game you might not have known anything about. Finally, thank you again to Atomfall for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to give Atomfall a try on Game Pass, Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, PS5, PS4, and PC via Steam or the Epic Games Store by using my links in the description or the pinned comment. If you've played Atomfall, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day and see you soon.